episode 185, IRONMAN Louisville with Erin Green. Welcome to the pursuit of the perfect race. I'm Coach Terry Wilson, and with each episode, I bring stories of athletes to you that share their experiences at races in order for you to learn how to have your perfect race. We will hear stories from athletes of all ages, abilities, and races of all distances. So regardless of where you fit in, there's something in it for you. Thanks for spending some time with me today. Now let the pursuit begin. Hey everybody, welcome back to the Pursuit of the Perfect Race. Today I have the pleasure of talking with Erin Green, who's a professional triathlete, about her recent race at IRONMAN Louisville. The race took place on October 14th, 2018, where the temperatures on race day ranged from 48 to 61 in wonderful rainy weather. Welcome to the show, Erin. I look forward to hearing about your race at Louisville.
Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. So I look forward to this. This is going to be pretty fun. You haven't ever done one before, and I look forward to this. This is going to be awesome. So what made you want to do this race in the first place?
It was actually on a whim. I raced Ironman Wisconsin, and I would say that was my A race, in the latter part of the season. And I was really confident and fit going into Wisconsin, and I did not have the race I know I'm capable of. So the week after Wisconsin, when you're kind of processing everything, and I hadn't put anything else on my schedule yet, I was like, how about Louisville? It's only 5 weeks away, which I've never done that quick of a turnaround, and it's reasonable to get to instead of, some of these other races that are, across the globe or in another country. So yeah, I've heard really good things about it. And, I had a homestay lined up actually from the year before, when I was injured and I wasn't able to go. So it kind of all fell into place.
Wow. I mean, you took sixth at Wisconsin.
Yes.
So that was a pretty good day.
It's funny because I have gotten a lot of compliments on that race and a lot of congratulations. And to be honest, a year ago, I probably would have been really stoked on a sixth place finish at an Ironman. I think what was frustrating for me is my performance. It wasn't about where I finished in the field. It was about my performance. And I knew what I was capable of, and I wasn't able to bring it out on that day. So I appreciate, how awesome it is to be able to go and, get sixth place. And that's an accomplishment, but it wasn't what I had set out to do.
Right. So going into Louisville, did you have a different mindset of, did you want redemption? Did you want to have fun? Did you want to win? What was your idea of going into this race?
Well, you always want to have that, goal of doing the very best you can. And if that means winning in the field, that's definitely in the forefront of your mind. I always want to have fun at a race, even if it's what my husband calls type 2 fun, meaning it's fun when it's over, but I always like having fun. But I think you hit it. Redemption was probably the big thing. I know probably the most disappointing thing in Wisconsin was my run. I ran a 3:27 in Wisconsin, and I've been training for and targeting around a 3:15, give or take. And I know I have that run, and I was ready to do it in Wisconsin, and it didn't happen. And that's frustrating. And I know, and this is going to sound funny coming from a dietitian, but I knew it was nutrition related. There was something I was missing nutritionally, and I could not figure it out. So I revamped my nutrition plan, recovered from Wisconsin, and was feeling really good going into Louisville, and was really hungry to finish out my season, with that redemption. So
on a positive note.
Yeah.
Wow. So going into Louisville and kind of Wisconsin, meaning they were so close, what was your training looking like on a weekly basis?
I had, usually that week after Ironman, you're traveling back home. I work besides triathlon, and so I'm always squeezing, like a typical 5-day work week into maybe 3 days after a race, which is pretty hectic. So I had a really light first week of training, just kind of move your body, get in the pool and do some really easy stuff. Get back on the bike for some easy spins, really light. And then probably a week after Wisconsin is when I started getting a little more structure back into my training, where I was doing some 2-a-day workouts. They were still pretty light in intensity and not very long. But within a couple weeks, I had, a full weekend of training. And I remember texting my coach and just being like, oh my gosh, I'm not recovered. Like, this is so hard. And, just feeling, I think one of the tricky things about Ironman is your body really starts feeling pretty good within a week to 10 days. If you're a very well-trained athlete, the soreness starts to go away. You start to feel a little spunkier. But for me, I get super tired and want to just sleep, and I can't just take a nap whenever because I have work or something else going on. And so that was really hard for me. I think it took me a little longer than I expected to come back around. So probably the third week after Wisconsin, I had like one solid, I would say like 7 days of, normal volume, normal intensity kind of training, and then started, ratcheting it back down the week before.
Okay. So what was your longest swim, bike, and run workouts in between Wisconsin and Louisville?
Oh, I'm going to have to.
You can just estimate. It's
I think
not
I had my biggest swim. I had a couple swims that were like between the 4K to 4,500 mark. I had a lot of short, frequent swims. Running was like really conservative. My longest run between Wisconsin and Louisville was 2 hours. And then my longest ride was a 4-hour training ride.
Okay, so you're all time based then, not really distance.
Yeah. Sometimes we'll do distance-based stuff when I'm in the middle of an Ironman build. For example, on the run, I'll have, a 22-mile run. And so it's not time-based, but I'll have pacing efforts within that run. But, we kind of shift from knowing you can, do these distances on time to knowing we want to know you can do 22 miles at this pace kind of thing. So I'll do some stuff based on distance, but most of it is on time.
Okay. So as intensity and volume increases, how do you mitigate the risk of injury?
Great question. And something I have struggled with in the past. I think every athlete probably does at some point, and there's definitely a fine line. Being a dietitian, I am really in tune with nutrition and refueling my body with the right kind of stuff, focusing on quality foods, not getting super wrapped up in leanness or diet tweaks or restriction or some of that stuff. I just will like give my body what it needs. Sleep is huge, so I prioritize. If I can't take naps during the day, I prioritize sleep a lot, where I'm really strict about my bedtime, wake up at a certain time. And then just, I think, knowing my body and communicating really well with my coach. So if I didn't have anything nagging or anything physically that led me to believe I was kind of walking that wire of maybe getting injured between Wisconsin and Louisville. And that was a great sign because I had never come back from an Ironman to try and bridge to another Ironman so quickly. But we definitely kept the communication open. She was like, I want to hear if there's anything that doesn't feel right to you. And yeah, I mean, just really taking care of my body and listening to it.
And this is Maryland, right?
Yeah.
Nice. And this is y'all's first year working together?
Yes.
So how was this process of selecting a coach for you?
Yeah, I worked with Robert Flanagan for 5 years before that. And he was so great that it was hard for me to decide to move on. But I'm getting to this point in my pro career where I have more racing behind me than I have in front of me. And I felt like it was time to try something new and to just see if, a different coach with a different approach and training modalities could bring something else out in me. So I started the process by I mean, I had a few coaches in mind that I know coach some other athletes that I know. So I reached out to those athletes about their coaches and kind of asked them some questions, confidential pros and cons. What is it like working with this person? I also reached out to some trusted friends that I know that have just been in the sport for a long time and got some information, some referrals from them. And I ended up interviewing 7 coaches. So I took it very seriously. And many of them actually were, I could see myself working with them. I'd be on the phone with them talking and going, man, they're great. Like I really like XYZ about their approach and what they do. Eventually I whittled it down to 4 candidates. And then I sat down with my husband one night and I said, we're going to decide, and I gave him like the whole pros and cons, like we wrote it on a whiteboard and really went through and like analyzed. And, he asked me the right questions. He knows me better than anybody. So then we narrowed it down to 2, and choosing between Marilyn and the other candidate was just so hard. And I went with my gut. And I'm very, very happy with my choice. I love working with Marilyn. We've spent some time together one-on-one at like training down in Tucson. And I just feel like, I met her final year as a pro. She raced in Boise and I was still an age grouper. And I remember at the time, meeting a pro, you're like, oh my gosh, it's a pro triathlete. Like it's this really exciting thing, and kind of place them on this pedestal. And I remember meeting her at this party, and she just was so like just a real person, very down to earth. We could talk about triathlon or not talk about triathlon. She was just so easy to talk to. And that saying that you might not remember what someone says, but you remember how they make you feel, rang true with Marilyn. So it made my choice a little bit easier.
Wow. Does Marilyn know that this big process took place?
Yeah. Yeah. And she knows the other candidates. I even told her, and she was like, oh my gosh, I was up against them. That's amazing. Like, I'm so flattered, and so, yeah, we're very open.
Wow. So what was most important about you picking a coach? Like, I mean, being that you're with somebody for 5 years, that's a long time. That's a lot of rapport. And that decision to not continue that relationship with one person, that's kind of hard in this situation. Yeah. And then it's almost
like a breakup.
Yeah, it is. It is.
Hard. It was really hard. And the fact that I had nothing really, I had no reason to leave Flanny, my old coach. So when I called, he made it so easy. I mean, we're friends. And when I called him and said, I'm going to pursue other coaching options, he was like, okay, let me know if you need any help figuring it out or if you have questions. So he was so supportive of it. And yeah, it was hard to decide what I was looking for because there wasn't anything really wrong. I guess I was looking for something different. And one thing I really liked about Marilyn is she has raced as a pro female. I mean, she has raced all over the world. She's trained with some of the best, the old charge in triathlon, the big names. She's trained and raced with a lot of them. And just that depth of experience was really important to me. And she's been involved in so many different sports, not just triathlon. I mean, she was an elite cyclist. She's done, horse racing and training. She's done powerlifting. So she just has this variety of coaching aspects that I thought would be really valuable.
Wow. So going into, we're just going to change a little bit of subject here, but talk about the training with all of your long training rides and runs and bricks and all this fun stuff. What kind of nutrition are you using, and how did you come to find this nutrition?
I used to really rely on just whole, like, I call it real food. So not the engineered sports foods like gels and stuff, but I used to do potatoes and bananas and pretzels and dates and some of those other things. And I have found that the more intense my training gets and the more racing I do, it's become really important to simplify and kind of streamline my nutrition. I partnered with Cliff starting in 2016, and they've been, I love their products. I love their company. Everything from having a company that's a community oriented kind of model to sustainability to, caring about our earth and how they develop their products, just really resonates with me. And the science behind their products is important too. So the types of carbohydrates they use and how their hydration mix is, the right blend of sodium, carbohydrates, that kind of stuff. I like the taste of a lot of their products, which is important too. And I like that they have a variety. It's not just like gels and chews and sports drink. They have different kinds of bars. They have granola now. So a lot of different options there.
Okay. So with all of these longer biking and running sets, are you eating their goos or their bars? What are you doing?
Yeah, I tend to do a combination of gels and their shot blocks, their chews on the bike with some hydration mix. And then on the run, I usually will stick to their shot blocks.
Okay. Now, are you trying to get like one in every kilometer or one in a mile? What does this look like?
Well, since I just changed my, are you talking on the bike now?
No, on the run.
On the run. Since I just changed my nutrition plan, it's relying more on sports drink in the race on course, but when I'm running, I actually will run with a bottle with a goal of how quickly I want to finish this 24-ounce bottle. And then I carry a pouch of chomps with me. And I'll usually take one every mile to mile and a half. And I kind of gauge on how my stomach is feeling and some of the biofeedback I'm getting from my body, because it depends on intensity and air temperature and, what I had for breakfast and all these other things.
Wow. As far as your training goes, knowing that you're coming off of a recovery cycle from Wisconsin and you're going into another full Ironman, what workouts did you want to do that would give you the confidence to go into Louisville prepared?
I wanted to, probably because running is the most injury prone of the three disciplines, it was really important for me to feel like my body was ready to run a marathon. So I knew that meant being patient, but I have to admit, after like getting into that third week, and I think my longest run had been like an hour at like super easy pace, I was like, okay, I need to know that I can do a longer session. So having a longer run session, I mean, like I said, it was only 2 hours. So, by Ironman training standards, that's not super long, but to bridge the two, that was a confidence builder for me. And then I think with the bike and with the swim, it was more just knowing that my body could handle the longer sessions and recover well off of it. I wasn't really worried about how I performed in those sessions, although I did just fine. I was swimming strong and biking strong by that third week of recovery. But it was important for me to feel like I could do those sessions and then bounce back and I wasn't just tanked. And that told me that I was recovered enough from Wisconsin to move forward with Louisville.
Okay. So how many hours a week were you maxing out your training at?
This season, I think my longest week was around 23 hours. And for a pro female, that's actually not a super heavy week. One of the things Marilyn has been working on with me is just trying to really get that volume. I was historically between like 16 to 18 hours during my peak Ironman phases, and now pushing over that 20 hours a week is, it's challenging with my schedule and my work schedule, but we get creative with how we fit it in. And, we've had some of those conversations where she's like, okay, you tell me your goals. I'm giving you the formula to get there. Let's find a way, So, we're getting to where I can just sustain that, 20 to 24-ish range pretty much be a standard week for me.
Wow. So you're training 20 to 24 hours a week. You also have a full-time job and a husband. How are you balancing life, work, and training successfully?
Yeah. Well, I work part-time. So I work 20 hours a week at our local health department, and some of that is from home, so I can have some flexibility there. I run my own nutrition coaching practice, and so again, some flexibility with time there. I can do some work on the weekends, or I can get up and do, an hour of work before I head out for my ride or something. I think, with my husband, he's incredibly supportive. Like, sometimes I'm just like, man, you're still not sick of this? Or at least he's not telling me he is. But without his support, I would never be able to do this. And so I think he's pretty easy about just, letting some things go around the house. Like if I didn't plan dinner or something, okay, we'll figure it out. We've got stuff to eat, or just not putting pressure on me to do extra. He's always trying to encourage me to like rest and put my feet up, and the whatever can wait. We prioritize date night, so we don't have a perfect track record, but once a week we plan a date night, and we'll even be like texting each other from work and be like, okay, when can we do date night this week? Because we haven't seen each other, at all. So I think that's important too. And we agreed when I started this 6 years ago, racing as a pro, we agreed that Team Green comes first. So, if things start going south, or if the balance is wrong, we need to have a check-in, and we both need to be willing to talk about that.
Wow. So you started your pro career 6 years ago. How did you know it was time to actually go pro versus staying an age grouper?
I qualified for my pro card sort of by surprise. I wasn't heading in that direction intentionally. I was just enjoying triathlon and racing as hard as I could and seeing how fast I could get, and I ended up qualifying for my pro card. And I talked with my husband, Matt, about it, and I talked with a few friends about it, some friends that were pros and some friends that were just, still elite age groupers. And I decided that racing against the best in the sport was probably the best way for me to bring out my potential. So I decided to go for it. And, with the plan that we'll give it a couple years and see how I like it, see if I'm even fast enough or good enough to, remain in the pro ranks, and see where it takes me.
Wow. So a little bit more about your training here. Were there any days where you just didn't really want to train?
Oh, yeah. Of course. Of course. Yeah, it's when you turn it into an occupation, it doesn't take all the fun out of it. Of course, I still enjoy it, but it changes your mindset going into some of the sessions. It does become work, and you have a much more mature look at doing what you don't want to do. Like, it's not about what you want to do. It's about your goals, the commitments you've made to, my coach, my husband, because any time that I'm training is time away from him and our life. And by damn, I better be putting everything I have into that training session, rain or shine. And sometimes when I don't feel like going out and doing the training is when I have some of my best sessions, because it almost forces my mind into that HTFU, mindset where I just have to grin and bear it. And usually I find something positive to take away from it anyway. I usually don't return home feeling as grouchy as I did when I left.
Wow. I think just bearing down and doing it sometimes helps. I've heard of people give yourself the warm-up, and if you still don't feel it after warm-up, then you can bag it, or get at least a portion of the main set in, or something other like that. or just text your coach and be like, is it okay to not do this one? Or
Yeah.
because I mean, sometimes if you're pushing on the third, fourth, and fifth week of a cycle, you're like, okay, I might be going a little bit too much.
Right. Right. And um I I'm a little bit different in that I never skip a session unless I am sick or injured, like physically cannot do it. I don't scale sessions that way. Um, I usually will go out, and even if I'm and I had actually several sessions like this year with Marilyn, where I was like, oh my God, I'm so tired. I don't know if I can do this, and kind of talking myself out of it before I even start. Oh, maybe I'll just, do 5 reps instead of 8, or maybe I'll just see how the first one goes, and then I'll, change my pace depending on that. And I would get really ticked at myself because why am I talking myself out of the workout before I even attempt it? And so um, I just committed to whatever it was she gave me, just do it. And if you don't hit them, I mean, what's the loss? You still got a great training session. But if you do hit them, that teaches you something. And
Yes.
yeah, it makes you a stronger athlete mentally, obviously physically, because you did the work. And there were some times I would text her and I'd be like, hell yeah. And I'd be just like celebrating and like exclamation points and emojis and all that stuff. And she's just laughing because she's been there. And she shared with me some of her experiences way back, when she was racing and training as a pro as well. And she's like, these are the kinds of breakthroughs that are more than just the work you're doing in the session.
And that's the things you can take and compare to outside of triathlon as well.
Definitely.
Wow. So moving on a little bit, what was your taper going into Louisville?
Really, it was just that week going in. It was kind of odd because all of the other Ironmans I've done, I've gone through this, like 3 weeks out, I am just cross-eyed, tired, and like on the rivet, and the high volume, and you kind of put yourself into zombie mode where you're just doing the work as much as you can, and then you get a little rest and you feel super fresh going into the race. This time I had that rest right after Wisconsin, and I was still like zombified and whatever, 2-3 weeks out. But I gradually built into the race. And so the weekend before, I had some pretty significant training that weekend. And it was kind of odd because it felt good. I mean, I felt strong, but I had gotten my rest earlier, right after Wisconsin, instead of taking that block of rest going into the race. So,
Wow. So when did you actually start wanting to travel to Louisville?
do you mean the date that I
Yeah,
traveled?
when did you want to get to Louisville and travel there?
So I wanted to give myself an extra day. When I went to Wisconsin, I felt a little bit pinched for time, just with wanting to check out the course, wanting to get some riding in that environment, getting my pre-workout stuff done. And then there's the checking in, and I had some press obligations and different things for Wisconsin. So I gave myself an extra day for Louisville. Plus, it's a 2-hour time change from Boise, which some people don't think is very significant, but for me, I had started adjusting my sleep that entire week before I traveled there. So when I arrived Wednesday night for Louisville and the race is on Sunday, I was already on Louisville time zone essentially. And I felt pretty well adjusted and pretty fresh. So, and then just having the days to relax and prep for my race and have plenty of time was really helpful.
Wow. So you get there on Wednesday and then you check in on Thursday. What was all this like for you as a pro here?
It was pretty easy. I was staying with a couple just 20 minutes outside of Louisville. So I went in Thursday, checked in for the race, or no, I lied. I checked in on Friday when I went to the mandatory pro meeting.
Okay.
So Thursday I did nothing but build my bike. I went went for a ride. I went grocery shopping because food is so important. I kind of just had a day to like get all my stuff in order before I needed to really start getting into kind of Ironman prep mode.
Wow. So you flew with your bike, I'm assuming?
Yes.
How did you get your bike there? Just a hard case? What kind of case do you have?
I have the Eris soft case that Blue makes, which I love because it's lightweight. It has like reusable Velcro padding, and it's easy. It has like nice, easy handles. It's like a big suitcase, really. And your bike isn't that heavy. It's just this big, awkward case to roll around. But this one is super nice, and I've traveled internationally with it too, and it's protected my bike no problem. So
Wow. And you also have a blue bike?
yes.
Nice. Do you like it?
Yeah. I love it actually. Yeah, they make great bikes. I ride the blue Triathlete, and I've been on it for 2 years. I feel like I finally got it dialed in. I rode the same bike for 6 seasons before this, so I had that thing just dialed, right? I never had to mess around with anything, the components or hydration or anything. It was just what it was. And setting this bike up, it was a lesson in how nothing is standardized in the bike industry. You know, there's different sizes for everything. And my local bike shop was great with that. And the guys at Blue were really great with just communicating like what options I have and like, you know, sending me parts and pieces if I needed them, that kind of thing.
Nice. So as far as selecting the bike, what was this process like?
Well, I was familiar with Blue because our local triathlon shop, Tri-Town, carried them when they first opened back, oh gosh, 2010 or 11 or something like that. So I was familiar with the brand. I'd heard really good things about their products and their bikes. So I went to Interbike in 2016 and seeking sponsors, and I had crossed paths with the Blue guys and talked with them and kind of showed them, you know, this is what I'm trying to do. And we hit it off, and they kind of offered me, this is what we can do for you. So I didn't necessarily pick the bike, but I got their top of the line, like their best bike, Tri-Bike. And it's definitely impressed me. It's a great ride.
So do you have digital shifting or electronic shifting?
Yeah, I have DI2.
Nice.
Mm-hmm.
My next bike
I
will
love
have
it.
that.
Yeah, it is worth it. And you know, people get I still hear people say like, "Oh, what if it gets wet, or what if I forget to charge it?" You know, you charge it like all your other gadgets. You just plug it in the night before the race or the day before, make sure it's charged. And I've never had it, knock on wood, I've never had it go dead. And there have been times when I've forgotten to charge it just in big training blocks, and I'm like, oh, maybe it's maybe it's time I charge this thing, but I've never had it fail me. And obviously I gave it the rain test in Louisville, and it worked beautifully. So we're good.
Wow. So you put all your stuff together on Thursday. Friday, you go check in, all that fun stuff. Saturday, you get to check the weather and prepare for the day to come. What were you doing from a nutrition standpoint during the day on Saturday, and what were you doing with the weather?
This episode is sponsored by Wasatch Apparel. Wasatch Apparel was founded on the belief that everyone should have the ability to have custom quality apparel without the stress of dealing with large clothing companies. The vision of Wasatch Apparel is to provide the highest quality apparel for endurance and fitness enthusiasts. They specialize in custom triathlon and cycling gear. Whether you're an individual that wants to make an impression or a large team that needs kits for everyone, Wasatch Apparel has the highest quality and customer service to deliver exactly what you need. Thank you, Wasatch Apparel, for sponsoring this episode.
What were you doing from a nutrition standpoint during the day on Saturday, and what were you doing with the weather?
Saturday, so the day before the race, I get most of my calories that morning. So I have a big breakfast, carb-based breakfast. And then the rest of the day, I kind of just I eat some protein, but easily digestible carbs, foods that are familiar to me. Make sure I'm kind of grazing and snacking throughout the day so I don't have like large meals that are taxing my system to digest. And watching Kona, because Kona was that day. And so I was kind of nice motivator, the day before my race, watching Kona. I had a lot of friends racing. And yes, checking the weather and formulating a plan so that I didn't freeze my ass off on the bike, because I knew the bike was going to be the hardest part of staying warm. And I talked with my coach about it. I talked with my husband about it, and a couple other athletes that I trust that have done some racing in inclement weather. And I was confident in my plan with the forecast that they had. But the forecast was warmer than race morning. It was in the mid 40s race morning, and they had forecasted it in the mid 50s. Still rain, so the rain wasn't a surprise, but that 10 degrees, it made a big difference. And it just felt cold. Like, it was so cold. I don't know. You had to be there, I guess.
Yes. So from a gear perspective, before you even got to race day, what were you wanting to prepare to use on race day?
So the morning of, I knew it was really important to stay warm before the race, right? Like, you don't want to be standing out there in thin little tights shivering before you even get in the water. And so I layered up and was like warm and dry, felt great leading up to the race start. And then one of my plan was to have arm warmers, a base layer, and tri-top, and those were dry. I didn't swim in them. I just swam in my shorts and a bra top, and then I put everything on in transition. And I had a plastic bag down the front of my jersey. I had socks, and I put a towel in my transition so I could just try and get off as much of the water as I could, partly to help with warmth, but also partly to help pull on all that stuff when you're wet. So that was my plan.
You just said that so nonchalantly, and you didn't even mention the fact that you were wearing a cow costume.
I forgot to bring warm pants for the start, and there was Walmart just across the street from my homestay, and they had Halloween costumes. And so I walked in, and I was like, I actually sent my husband a picture of the cow onesie, because I'm partnered with Dairy West, and I knew they would love it. I mean, of course, it would be really appropriate for Wisconsin, but they didn't have it. It wasn't Halloween. So I texted my husband a picture, and I was like, do you dare me to wear this to the race start? And he replied, I don't dare you to do anything, because you'll do it. So, I figured, screw it. It's the end of the season. I've got a good sense of humor, and to be honest, it was brilliant because it kept me so warm. Like, I actually dug it out of my morning clothes bag after I fast forward a little bit, but after I ended the bike, got transported back to transition, walked over to the finish line, grabbed my morning clothes bag, and I fished that thing out of there and put it on right in the middle of downtown Louisville. I don't care. It was the warmest thing I had, and it was so brilliant. And it lightened the mood for everybody. I got so many smiles. I got tons of like dry cow jokes about that's utterly fantastic, or move over, or don't have a cow. Like, I got so many jokes. And so it was fun that I could help brighten the morning, because it was dreary and cold, and people looked so miserable. And then they'd look over at me, and I'm sure part of them were like, who the hell is that? Like,
And then they're like, oh, that's brilliant.
She's a pro. Yeah. A lot of people were like, oh, I wish I had that. I wish I would have thought of that. So yeah, it served dual purpose.
Wow. So the night before the race, what time are you trying to go to bed?
Sometimes I have trouble sleeping before a race, but I actually was ready for bed like 8:39. So I went to bed at 9. I think I read for a little bit and slept pretty well.
Nice. So you're reading a book? What book are you reading?
I'm reading. It's on my Kindle, and so I always forget what the title is. Because
Oh, it's not that big of a deal.
I'll tell you, but it's very good. It's entertaining. Digging In is the title of it.
Okay.
A novel. Yeah.
Awesome. So after you wake up on race morning, you realize that it's going to be raining and wet, and you realize that Daniela won Kona and Lucy Charles unfortunately came in second.
Right.
Then you get ready to go to transition and do your morning routine. What is your morning routine before you leave your home state?
Well, I have breakfast right away, so I try and eat that 3 to 3.5 hours before gun time. And I was very organized for this race. I had all of my bottles made, ready to go. I had everything packed. It was just a matter of grabbing my backpack and putting on the cow onesie and getting into the car and driving down there. I actually arrived with tons of time. I got parking really close to transition, and I remember sitting in the car listening to the radio, and it was just dumping rain. And I was like, I'm not getting out yet. I'm gonna wait as long as I can. So I kind of just sat in the car and hung out for a little while and stayed warm until I felt like it was about time to go set things up. And we were lucky. The pros didn't have to check their bikes the night before, so I could just take my bike and my nutrition and everything, and just rack it, basically throw my bags in transition and walk to the swim start. So I had a really leisurely morning, and then we stood around waiting for the race to start for quite a while.
Wow.
After that.
So you get to transition. What are you doing in transition before you head to the swim start?
Well, all my nutrition was on my bike. Basically just put bottles in, make sure my computer's working, kind of do a final check of everything, make sure brakes are in good shape, not rubbing. I usually will do a mental run through of transition and get my feel for the flow of it. Where am I coming from the swim? What path am I going to take to get to my bike? Took my bags down to the run and bike drop off, which I have to say the transition area in Louisville was really easy, and everything was right there. I've been to transitions before where it's like a major hike to drop things off and you're carting bags around all morning. And this was really easy to get in and out. And then you walk about a mile to the race start, which is upriver a little ways. And and then it was kind of hanging out until it was about time to put the wetsuit on, which I postponed as long as I possibly could because that cow onesie was so warm. So yeah, and then I usually will have a little snack or something, or a gel, probably 20 minutes before the start. Maybe sip some water with it or sports drink, just depending on what I have with me.
But then they delayed the swim start by 30 minutes.
Yes, they did. I had just dropped my morning clothes bag too. So I had finally parted with my shoes and was standing on that cold pavement with socks, which didn't really help because it was so wet that it soaks through your socks right away. It's still raining on us. And they made the announcement. We were supposed to get in the water like in, I don't know, less than 10 minutes. And they announced that they were resetting the course. So that was a bummer. Stood around and danced and hopped around with a few other female pros trying to stay warm.
Who all were you talking with there?
Amy Van Tassel.
Oh my gosh.
Whom you've had on before.
Yes.
Yeah,
she's such a sweetheart.
Oh man, you talk about keeping the mood light. She's your girl. Lenny Ramsey was there. And I actually hung out with her and her wife, Rebecca, leading up to the start. And so we were kind of we were actually hanging out in the wrong spot. It wasn't we were like with all the age groupers where they were staging them further down the river. And we're kind of like, where is the swim start? We're looking around for the gates and the arch and everything, couldn't find it. And then when I did warm up jog, I was like, oh, it's, it's down here. So, who else? Lizzie Nitre was there. Jen Spieldenner was kind of bouncing around like, like a ping pong ball, just full of energy because and like super amped up because it was her first Ironman. And she was pissed because they shortened the swim because she's a swimmer, and she was like, yeah, I'm a little pissed at that. And then she disappears again. And I'm like, where'd Jen go?
Gosh.
Yeah. And, there were several pros. We were all just kind of like mulling about, some of them were lucky enough to have shoes and jacket and maybe, a spouse or a friend or somebody that was holding on to some gear that they could kind of wrap up in and stay warm. But many of us were just standing there on the pavement in wetsuits, shivering and laughing.
Man. So after you realize that it's going to be a delayed start from a nutrition standpoint, does this impact you at all?
It didn't because the swim was also shortened.
Okay.
So, I'm going to swim for 15 minutes before I'm in transition, getting ready to get on my bike. And I was very confident in my nutrition the days leading up to the race and that morning. So I didn't feel like there was anything that needed to be adjusted.
Okay. Now, the pro men go off at 8. Y'all are in the water by 8:05?
Something like that. I wasn't sure on the exact times. But it was... Yeah, I think they let us in at 8:05, and then the men went shortly after, and we were all allowed in the water at the same time.
Okay. So the gun goes off for the pro women. Walk me through the swim course for you.
Well, they didn't really explain the new swim course, which sounds simple enough, right? You get in, you follow the orange buoys down to transition. It's just downriver along the shore. But it was specified that we need to keep all buoys on our left. So, we want to make sure we swim the course. So you don't want to cut a buoy or anything. And where we were stationed for the start, I kind of looked around at a few of the other pros around me, and we're kind of asking each other, where does the course go? Like, what are we looking at? Where's our sighting buoy? And you could see the orange buoy right off the start. And then diagonally kind of out toward the middle of the river under a bridge, you could see the next orange buoy. So we were kind of looking at that, like, do we just sight off of that buoy? Because it doesn't make sense to go straight out and hit this one and then angle over. You want to swim a straight line to whatever you're going. So the men went off, and it's like there's steam coming off the water because the air temperature is cold. It's dawn, there's cloud cover, you can't see much. And we're kind of watching, like, where are they going? Trying to figure out how we can follow them. And when the gun went off, I was never swimming alone. I was always with people. So I knew I was, somewhat on the right course if you're swimming around other pro females. But as we got out from, you have this little island that you start on these docks. And this island kind of protects you from the main river flow. And the reason they shortened the swim is because the river current was so strong, they didn't want us swimming against the current. And I would say they made the right call because it was basically impossible to swim against the current. And I aimed for this buoy under the bridge, the far one that I was kind of swimming diagonal. And suddenly I see this line of kayakers kind of coming out in front of my path, and they're pointing me to go to my right. And I look to my right, and I see this orange buoy off to my right, probably, 50 yards or something, 100 yards. And I'm like, oh, crap, I missed a buoy. And so I turned straight for that buoy to try and keep it on my left, and I'm sighting off of it, and as I'm watching it, I'm like, that damn thing's moving, like the buoy is moving. And so I'm thinking like it came loose, and it took me a few strokes to realize I was moving with the current. The buoy was, staying put. So I had to fight the current a bit to just get angled properly to go to the buoy. But then I realized I was being carried past it, and I needed to actually swim upstream to round the buoy and keep it on my left. Otherwise, you got the course, you're DQ'd. And that was, I really didn't I had underestimated the current until this point. And this is only the second buoy. So I've been in the water, swimming maybe not even 5 minutes. And I turned upriver and I was swimming all out and not making
just to
headway.
get to the buoy.
Like I wasn't even closing in on the buoy. I was just staying stationary, watching the buoy just sit there. I wasn't getting any closer. So I just put my head, I could see another female pro on the other side of it, and she was having the same fight. So I knew she was trying to get to that buoy too. And I could see some others around me. We were all fighting to get to this buoy. So I finally just like put my head down and like as hard as you can, 10 strokes and see if you get there. And I finally got to that buoy. I get to the upstream side of it and I go to round the buoy, to turn and go back downstream. And as I'm rounding it, I could feel that I kind of got pulled underneath it because, you try and get your arm out to do a stroke and you feel this heavy material over your head. So I knew I was under the buoy. And then I felt the current push my midsection into the cable under the buoy. So I'm essentially pinned for a couple seconds under this buoy. And that current was, I've grown up around Idaho rivers, I've played in them and I'm familiar with them. That current was no joke. And if I hadn't been as comfortable of a swimmer, if I had been in a group with people around me, it was very dangerous. It was a point where I didn't panic, but I remember having this very clear feeling of urgency of the situation.
So it wasn't necessarily a high anxiety or panic attack, but it was definitely close to that.
It was that moment where that if you're in danger and if you don't get yourself out of danger right away,
something else could happen.
Serious. Yeah. Like you don't mess around and you just keep your head about you. Like I said, I didn't panic, but I popped up out of the water as soon as I had to fight to get free of the cable. It wasn't just like, oh, I bumped into it and oh, I'm under a buoy.
You're wrapped around it.
I was like against the cable and the current was holding me there. And I popped my head up after I got around that buoy, and I'm just screaming at the nearest kayaker. That is too dangerous. That's too dangerous. No more. That is not safe. Like I'm screaming anything that I can get to convey that this is not okay.
That's not cool.
For like a whole, gob of swimmers to be, anybody who's been in, it was a rolling start, so it probably wouldn't be a crazy mob of people that a mass start would have. But anyone who's not comfortable in the water and wouldn't have been as strong as I could, to pull myself free and get around it as well as I did, it was serious.
Man. So after this right here, how's the rest of the swim course go for you?
Well, it went fine because you're like sailing along, at like 50 seconds per 100 or something. So, I felt like the current kind of kept pulling me out toward the middle of the river versus keeping me toward the shoreline where the buoys were. So after this was all said and done and my whole incident with buoy number 2 and all that crap, I think I probably swam over a mile, but yeah, I made it to the exit just fine. And, the rest of the swim was a cruise.
Cool. So you get to T1. How does T1 go for you? It's pretty quick, less than half of your overall time in the water. You're in there proportionally pretty fast, but you changed and whatnot.
I had the slowest transition of all the pro females, and I think it was just the pulling on the layers, the putting on, some of them just put jackets on, like one thing, you put the jacket on and you go. I didn't plan for that option. And so I was pulling on arm warmers. I was pulling on socks on wet feet and, wrestling around with a base layer. And of course I had a volunteer there to help me. But it was a slow transition, but I wasn't worried at all about how much time I took in transition. It was more important that I stuck with my plan of putting all of my layers on to try and
stay dry-ish.
Yeah.
So as you were getting through the change tent, getting to your bike, What was your mindset at this point for the bike ride? Because it was still raining, it was cold, and now you have to ride 112 miles in this shitty weather.
Right. I know. Every person's dream right there, you know.
No, not mine.
I know, you'd be fine not doing that. The only thing about the weather that was in the forefront of my mind was safety. So making sure that I could see. I was a little bit worried about like my visor getting, too rain covered and maybe it would affect visibility. I was concerned about bike handling, not just, how I could grip the bike in the rain, but also, I noticed when I took this like short little descent out of transition and then, hook a left to head out on River Road, my brakes weren't responding like they would on dry wheels.
Really?
So, I felt like I had to kind of skim some of that water off the rim of the brake before it would actually start to catch, normally. So that was a consideration, something I had in my mind. And then, nutritionally, because I had this new revamped nutrition plan, I was super committed to testing this out and seeing if it worked. Now, you're trying to take like salt when you've got wet hands, and every time you open the flask, the water gets in there, so it's clumping, and then you've got cold hands to try and reach for bottles, and my shot blocks had turned into like this slimy gobs in my bento box. I mean, there were just all these things that all of a sudden the rain brought this new component of complexity to the race. So really it was more about managing all of those things versus worried about how cold it was or I'm riding in the rain for 5 hours,
Right. So when you say you have cold hands, cold feet, I don't really think that does it enough justice with this, honestly, because I had cold hands and cold feet, and I was volunteering in transition.
Thank you, by the way.
You're welcome. So how could you better describe how cold you really were on the bike?
Well, within 10 minutes, I would say I was soaked through and really starting to feel the cold. I could not feel my legs from the time I started riding. I mean, it felt like icy cold. Because I had wet shorts on and nothing. I had no tights or leg warmers or anything, which would have been amazing. I got to the point where I couldn't feel where my hands were, like as far as shifting. Like I knew which fingers belonged to which buttons just from, riding so much, but I couldn't actually feel if I was pushing the button until I would feel it shift. And I guess the beauty of this was because I couldn't feel my legs, I just kept telling myself to push harder and maybe you'd warm up, like just mash, and see if your legs will respond. And I would say I was riding pretty decently when I was riding, just hoping that I would get feeling back into my legs and my feet. So I went through that first aid station and I stopped for probably, I don't even know. I mean, it always feels longer than it really is, but maybe 5 minutes to wrestle a trash bag with one of the volunteers to like get it in my kit, down my shorts, down my back. Like it was pure survival now. Cause I was just like, I don't really care about how fast I clear this course now. It's a matter of actually surviving this day.
So at some point along this point in time, the idea of redemption from Wisconsin was fading away.
Oh yeah. That was not, I mean, I want to have the strongest race I can, but Wisconsin was a very distant memory. This was like so immediate in what I needed at this moment that I wasn't even thinking about, the marathon PR that I was hoping for, or I mean, even like nailing the nutrition plan exactly, because I was like, man, if I can even get my fingers to work so I can grab the nutrition, that's a win. So it really became like, how do I manage what is happening? It was crazy.
What kind of gloves were you using?
I did not bring any warm gloves. I never raced with gloves, and so I just did not even bring them, and I didn't think about it. I bought some, just those cotton, like one size fits all gloves, and cut the fingertips off of them, and put those on in transition, hoping that I would have the dexterity, with the fingertips missing, to grab things, but it would offer some warmth. But with the wind and the rain, they weren't enough.
Well, if this ever happens again, I would actually recommend getting dishwashing gloves.
Amen, brother. I've been told that already.
Yes. My athlete that was there, she thought I was absolutely crazy when I suggested that. And then afterwards, she was like, "Oh my God,
Yeah.
you saved my life."
Yep. I saw somebody riding with them, actually, and I had to laugh, but it's so brilliant, these things that you come up with when you're in survival mode, just to get you through, because the conditions are so extreme. Yeah, that was something. And then another thing I thought about was getting like the cheapest rubber soled house slippers that I can find and leaving those at the race start, because I think that would have saved like just the cold standing on the pavement. So yeah.
I like that, yeah. Like house shoes from Dollar Tree or something.
Exactly. Yeah, I think when I knew I was really in trouble physically, like this is getting borderline dangerous, was when we hit the rolling part of the course.
So what, miles 10, 15?
Yeah, probably 15 to 20-ish. Okay. The descents were so cold. I was shivering, like literally shivering, so that my bike was like wobbling. And I knew it was warmer in aero because it would keep the wind chill off of my chest and my core. So I would tuck into aero position, dip my head as far as I could, and just like, I could feel like my body kind of locking into spasm because it was shivering so hard to stay warm. But then I was also like voluntarily trying to tuck in a little tighter. And my brain kind of started going to this place of that nonchalance that you get when you're getting too cold, where you kind of like, whatever. Like, I know I'm kind of aware this is dangerous, but and that was it for me. I was like, this is not, there's still a part of my brain, obviously, that was working and was like, this is not worth it. It's not worth it. It's not a badge of honor to push past the point of safety and risk my health and my safety, or possibly someone else. I mean, if I wreck, I could take out another athlete, and that's not cool either. So, and I had nobody there. My husband wasn't there at the race, so it's not like he could, come and rescue me if I end up in a med tent or in a hospital or something. So it was a really tough realization to come to, but I knew that it was the responsible thing to do.
How did you deal with this mentally? You said, okay, I'm going to stop at the next aid station and just call it and let that be it? Or did you say, okay, this is going to suck. I came here for redemption. That didn't happen. And now then that's going to kind of put you into a negative mindset after you leave to go home if you don't push past this, because you have these conflicting interests of, I at least have to finish this and see how I do, because I want to finish, obviously, but I might get money if I finish now as a pro. But if I don't finish, I don't have any. I'm here for nothing. Literally, I get nothing for being here.
Right. The interesting thing about that was I had glimmers of some of the long-term implications of pulling out of the race, but they weren't at the forefront of my mind. It was really like, I had points where I was asking myself, what do I need to keep going? Like, I'm really to the point where I have done everything I can think of to sustain this. What else do I need? And the answers were to get dry or to have more layers. And I didn't have either of those things. So, I really wasn't thinking about the whole reason I went to Louisville for redemption and, try and have a PR on the run and, try and nail my nutrition. And it really became like, how do I even survive this day? And I kept thinking, well, if the girls ahead of me or the girls behind me are dropping out, maybe I just have to finish, right? Like you said, and maybe I'll get a payday, just for finishing. But then, and I bargained with myself. Like when I realized I was probably going to pull out of the race, I told myself just 10 more minutes. Hang in for 10 minutes. See what you can do. Push harder, try and move your body a little more, wake up. And then 10 minutes would go by and I'd be like, okay, another 10 minutes. And I would just try and tell myself, but it really started getting to the point where I could not, I did everything I could do.
So how far did you end up getting?
Like 90 minutes into the bike. I rode for an hour and a half and then pulled out. The final town, I pulled out in LaGrange, which is the last town you really go through before you start heading out in the countryside. And I had ridden that part of the course before, and so I knew that if I kept going, I mean, sure, there's spectators and there's aid stations and, different things, but I really was, committed if I kept going past LaGrange. And was that safe? Was that a prudent thing to do?
Wow. So what was it like to actually drop out?
Shitty. I stopped in LaGrange. I saw a cop car at an intersection and I just stopped and was like trying to make my lips work, saying, I need to get warm, I need to get warm. And he came over and he's like, are you okay? Like, do you need medical attention? I just said, I need to get warm, and I'm shivering. And so he takes my bike. He's like, okay, come over here, and takes me over to this covered storefront. And immediately these two women come out of nowhere, taking off their coats, wrapping me up, giving me like a full body hug and like comforting me and telling me, you did so great. You're okay. But like, just, very motherly. And of course, when you're like on the brink of survival, that's like the best thing to have in the world. Right. And they were wonderful. And of course I'm worried, like, I'm going to get your stuff wet. And, you don't want to, they're like, oh, you did so great. Let's just get you warm. Do you need something else? And then this guy came over and said, hey, I've got my truck over here. I'll turn the heat on full blast if you want to sit in here. And I knew, by this point, I'm very emotional. And all I kept saying was, I don't want to quit. I don't want to quit. Like, I knew this wasn't what I wanted, but it was the right decision. And I knew once I stopped, there was no going again, that when it was over, it was over. And so when the guy came over, and turns out he's an officer, he's a cop up in Wisconsin. So you gotta love those Midwesterners, right? They come rescue you every time. He sat me in his pickup, turned on the heat, and he had an electric plug-in blanket. So he plugs in that. I was like, who the hell is this guy? And then it turns out he's a cop from Wisconsin. He had blankets he was pulling out of every corner of that pickup. He had extra clothes. Like, it was crazy. So I sat in there. Oh, and I used his phone to call my husband back in Idaho. And my husband was tracking the race on his phone. And he gets this pop-up call, while he's tracking from a Wisconsin number. And he's like, whatever, I don't know, you robocall. And he swipes it off. So he didn't answer. So I left him a voicemail that was this rambling, blubbering, shaky voice. He said he had to listen to it twice to realize it was me, because he didn't know. He was like, who's calling me from Wisconsin? Like, it didn't make any sense. And he finally, figured it out. So I did let him know that I was safe and that I was pulling out of the race. And then I had two other athletes join me, like within 20 minutes. They were just stopping.
Age group athletes?
Yes. And then Ironman sent a van around to pick up the athletes that were dropping out on the bike. And I had another pro male in there with me. And we just drove around and picked up athletes until we didn't have any more room. And
what did you do with your bike?
Well, I was lucky. Because I was one of the first ones to get picked up, they had room for my bike in the van. But everybody else, there were stacks of bikes it looked like a transition zone at the aid stations or at the school back in Buckner where they took us, because there were just bikes like leaning up against trees and stuff just all over. And they staged us in the school in Buckner, which looked like a natural disaster. Amy VT called it her refugee camp, because it was like just all these people that were wrapped up in space blankets and hospital blankets, stripping off wet clothes. The first responders were great and were kind of ordering us around as far as like, take off your wet clothes, putting extra blankets on us, double checking to see if we needed medical attention.
From what I understand of this situation at the refugee camp was they were instructing athletes to literally take off their tri-kit and only wear a blanket.
Oh, I wasn't instructed to do that. In fact, I don't think I was by the time I got to the school, I had 2 space blankets around me and 2 hospital blankets. And I was so like mummified and wrapped up that I was like, I'm not taking anything off. Like, I'm finally warm. I'm staying, status quo. And the poor volunteers had the heat cranked in the vans and on the school bus that they were like, I saw the school bus driver sweating. He was like trying to take his coat off. Like, he was so hot, and all of us are like, more heat, So, I actually ran into a friend that I know through the Wadi Inc. team. His name's Joe Lauricella, and he actually ended up at the school with me. And so it was, we had our moment where, gosh, the tears come and it's really over, and this just sucks so bad, to work so hard for something and feel like you did everything you could and you got beat on the day. That's what it felt like to me, is I lost. And that's a really hard reality to come to grips with. So when I saw Joe, it was kind of nice. We got to like talk with each other and debrief a little bit. And we decided to go to the finish line after we got, back and collected and everything, to go cheer people on.
Wow. So whenever you called your husband and finally got him on the phone, what did he say? I got back to my phone. And I mean, this whole process of taking us off the course, taking us to the school, loading us onto buses, was taking hours.
Yeah. I mean, I think it was 4.5 hours from the time I pulled off the course in LaGrange to the time that I actually got to my phone. And my husband had texted me a few times, and, once to say, hey, I got your message, I'm really sorry, whatever. And then another time to say, hey, I'm getting a little worried. Where are you? Like, what's going on? So I called him and I recounted my day, and he was like, look, we can talk more about this. I do want to hear more about this, but you need to hang up and make a Facebook post, because I am blowing up. Like, everybody's wondering where you are, and your tracker just stopped working, and people are hearing about the epic conditions and they're worried. So you need to let them know that you're okay. So I did.
Wow. So all of this is your day at Louisville this year. Are you going to go back next year for redemption there?
I would love to. I really was excited to ride that bike course, and the people there were great. I have to say, given the chaos of the day, every volunteer I ran into was patient. They were helpful. So the people there were really great. I think it's well organized. And it was painful to be at the finish and know that I hadn't earned my way to that finish. So yeah, I would love to. In fact, one of the first things my husband said was, I know we had planned on this being, your season closer, but if you want to, go for another race this year, I'm 100% behind you. Think about it. There's Arizona, Cozumel, which are reasonably easy for us to get to from Idaho. But I decided I needed to, start my postseason training, take a little break, and kind of recalibrate for next year.
Wow. So do you have anything else you want to add about your race here? I mean, that we went in a few different directions there, but I feel like that just wraps up the whole day right there, because it all really comes back to a supporting husband.
Yeah. Yeah. And just knowing I got a lot of really great messages that meant a lot to me, that one race outcome doesn't define you as an athlete. It doesn't reflect on your commitment and your prep going into that race and your ability. I think it was really important for me to have, not only Matt's support in whatever I wanted to do, to cope appropriately with this outcome, but just from other athletes that race there or were watching, from back home, that said, you made the right decision for you, and that must have been tough. And, we love you anyway. It's a
Right.
nice feeling to have at the end of the day.
And I'm sure having grace and having gratitude for the event only goes so far, because a DNF, it's to say it's a hit to the ego and the athletic spirit that we have is really an understatement, because unless you've dealt with the DNF before, it isn't easy at all.
No, and I know I've actually had this conversation with multiple athletes, pro and age grouper, um, about, what happens when an athlete actually kind of, breaks the seal on their first like true DNF. And many people believe that it gets easier after one. Then you kind of are like, oh, well, I already got that one black eye out of the way, so I guess I'll just, like they kind of, it gets a little easier to kind of throw in the towel. And I've always prided myself on finishing what I start and learning from everything, even if it's not going my way in racing or, in life. So it was really difficult for me to kind of process this and understand that I did make the best decision for myself. This doesn't mean that I'm just going to quit when things get tough in the future, because, as my coach told me when we talked, she was like, Erin, just knowing you and your commitment to the sport and your training and what you want to do, you did everything you possibly could to keep going on that day. So you have to just put that to rest, that it wasn't like a weakness. It wasn't me throwing in the towel just because things weren't going my way. It truly was a decision that was best for me at the time. And I have to be at peace with that. So I would say I'm probably there. I'm at peace with it.
Well, good. I'm glad to hear that. I mean, my wife and I DNF'd her race at Galveston a few years ago, and that was gut-wrenching for her. And hearing this firsthand from you at a full versus a half, it's not easy to deal with at all. As far as telling others what you learned through this experience, what would you like to pass on to someone who hasn't experienced this?
I guess, probably the first thing is to trust your own judgment, what's best for you on the day. I worried about, or I guess not really worried, but I kind of chastised myself at the finish. Like, how could all of these people, persevere and I couldn't? Like, it felt like a weakness. And I really had to reassure myself that I made the best decision for me on the day. And beyond that, I mean, I think when I reflect on my preparation, I feel like I prepared as best as I could for what I expected on that day. I say expect the unexpected and get creative with like the extreme what ifs. When the weather is that unpredictable, and we had record rainfall, leading up to it. And it was cold enough that, when you're training for what you think is going to be a hot race, your body is already acclimated for the heat. And so the cold is going to feel colder. Just really, we already talked about like the dish gloves, the house slippers, there are so many things that you can get creative with. I say do a little research on that. People have all these things for staying cool in hot races, all these little tricks and things that they do. They freeze their bottles. They, have a pantyhose with ice in it or whatever. And I mean, all these different things. I say do a little bit of homework if you're confronted with a race like that. And don't worry about what you look like out there, because I saw people on bikes that would be like a down payment on a house that had a parachute for like a jacket or a trash bag flapping in the wind behind them. So
Yes. Pros were coming in off the bike wearing wind jackets. Like,
yeah.
just trying to stay warm.
Yeah.
Man.
Yeah.
So to transition a little bit to wrap the episode up here, what races are next for you? Do you have next year planned out yet?
I don't know, because, it's the end of the season, and then looking at the Ironman opportunities for next year, it's kind of tough, because the first North American race is Texas in April, and I would really like to get started before that on full distance. So I don't know. I might consider going abroad and doing some crazy epic trip. I might just do like 70.3s, in quick succession around here if I can, around North America, South America if I can, a little bit easier to get to. I honestly don't know. I think a lot of cross training with raking leaves and skate skiing is in my future, and then I'll sort out the schedule in a little while.
That's awesome. So you've been in the sport for quite some time. What races are on your bucket list?
Well, Challenge Roth is probably at the top of the list. I'd love to make it to Kona. That's, part of this whole Ironman campaign.
Is there like a program in place for pros to legacy? Like, hey, I've been a pro for 20 years and I've never gotten my slot. Do I get one?
Doesn't work that way. No.
If you're a pro, are you still allowed to use the legacy after you don't have a pro card anymore?
Oh, now that's a good question. I don't know if you can bank those pro races to be a legacy.
I don't know. We can't be the first ones to think about that.
I know. Well, you'd be surprised. It's Ironman.
You are correct there. So as far as people following you, how can people follow and reach out to you?
I'm very active on Instagram. It's MFEG. And
what does that stand for?
Motherfucking Erin Green.
Yes. Okay.
I married into that name. I didn't make it.
I was wondering what it was. I was like, it can't be. It can't be. But then it's like, okay, yes, it is. Okay.
Yes.
And then Facebook, you said?
Yeah, I'm active on Facebook, and I have a website, eringreenracing.com, where I have a portal where you can contact me there. Yeah, I answer to all of those.
Cool. Well, Erin, it's been great having you on the show. I've enjoyed spending some time with you, and I would love to have you back on after a successful race and actually go through all of the fun details with you. And I welcome you back in the future. And to wrap up the episode, it's the obvious question, and that's, what's your definition of a perfect race?
Oh. I think I think it's what you make of it. I think you can create the perfect race in your mind regardless of how the day went. So to make it succinct, I think your mindset can create the perfect race.
What do you mean? Well,
so even if the little details didn't go the way you planned, or you messed something up, I mean, however you take that race and move forward with it, whether it's using it as a learning experience, or reflecting on, it actually wasn't that bad, or, hey, I'm just happy to be done. That was amazing. I feel great at the finish. I think those are all things that you kind of process in your own mind. So you could look at the race as a failure and be like, God, that sucked. I screwed up XYZ. Or you can look at it as a success, or maybe that was the perfect race for me in that, that day or that situation.
So you're saying it's subjective.
I think so.
Gotcha. Well, Erin, thank you so much. I've enjoyed it, and I look forward to following you in the future. I hope you have a wonderful next
Thanks for
season.
tuning in
and you
today.
get some
I hope you were able to
redemption
learn
next
something from
year.
today's episode.
Thank
If
you
you
so
enjoyed the
much.
show,
I
please take a
appreciate
minute to leave a
the
review on
opportunity.
iTunes or share it with a
welcome. Have a good day,
friend.
and we'll talk
Be
soon,
sure to
okay?
subscribe so you never
Okay,
miss an
thanks.
episode. If you'd like to see pictures from this athlete's race, learn more about who I am, what I'm doing, or be on the show yourself to share your story, check out my website at CoachTerryWilson.com. Until next time, continue the pursuit.